Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you all for joining. Today we're going to speak a little bit around mastering incrementality tests and what that really means for us as performance marketers, as well as how SegmentStream can maybe help you as a marketer overcome the challenge of setting up an incrementality test, the value of an incrementality test, and really, what benefits that can bring to you as a performance marketer. A brief introduction to myself. My name's Ben. I'm the Chief Revenue Officer here at SegmentStream. I've been around the performance marketing space and ad tech space for the guts of 10 years now. So I have a broad range of experience from managing campaigns myself hands-on all the way to consulting large advertisers on their performance marketing activities, and now lucky enough to lead a great team of account executives and customer success managers supporting SegmentStream customers. So to walk through today's agenda, we have a pretty jam-packed agenda. What we're going to be looking at is, I suppose, firstly, what is an incrementality test, and we'll speak around the basics there. But then we'll kind of get into things a little bit more, maybe speaking specifically around for your business. So what does an incrementality test mean for your business? Is your business suitable? As we go on, we'll speak a little bit more around, the pros and cons, because there certainly are various types of incrementality tests that you can run, and of course, the pros and cons of running specifically GEO incrementality tests. We'll speak a little bit around the costs and ROI, and hopefully we have some time for questions at the end where you can use the chat there, and we'll do our best to answer as many questions as possible. So jumping straight in, what is an incrementality test? Essentially, an incrementality test is measuring the impact, or that incremental impact, that incremental lift that your marketing campaigns or marketing channels are bringing. So what we're ultimately doing in any incrementality test is very similar to an A/B test. We have a control and a test, and we're influencing either one of those, and we're measuring the incremental difference. So what is that lift within that particular test branch? So this is an approach that has been used for some time, but of course we're seeing a rise of incrementality tests, and I'll speak a little bit in a moment as to why perhaps we're seeing the rise of incrementality. So on this slide here, we speak to that, right? So I'm sure you're all aware that traditional cookie-based attribution, whether that be multi-touch or even the most sophisticated data-driven attribution models, they're no longer reliable, particularly when we're investing across channels, so across search, social, display, video. Really, it's incredibly difficult to use a cookie-based solution to measure the incremental impact of your various different performance channels. So that's one reason we're starting to see incrementality tests, kind of the rise of that as an additional source of measuring the true impact of your performance marketing campaigns. Of course, we have channels like Meta, like TikTok, display, etc., that ultimately we're seeing a lot of impressions and video views that are maybe not resulting in a website session or a website behavioral data. And of course, there's impact in that, there's value in that, but often it's incredibly difficult to measure the true impact of that. Incrementality test is a way to overcome that, to give you a better understanding of the true impact of these maybe mid and upper funnel channels that perhaps are predominantly impression or video view based. Then the third point on the slide speaks to maybe more traditional marketing mix modeling. So some of you on the line may be familiar with this kind of traditional MMM. Typically with MMM, we need a large amount of data. So we're really speaking to the advertisers that are investing well over, $500,000 to $1 million a month in ad spend. They perhaps have quite an advanced data science or analyst team in-house, and it just requires a lot of time, a lot of cost and data. Marketing mix modeling is incredibly helpful and beneficial if you are an advertiser that has that data available to you. But what we're seeing is that for a lot of advertisers, MMM is quite costly, time consuming to run, or perhaps they don't have enough data to run that. So again, incrementality tests is an additional methodology to be able to measure incrementality or measure the true effect of your channels and campaign performance without relying on maybe a solution like MMM. So I'll speak a little bit to the types of incrementality tests. So firstly is a user level randomization. And essentially what we're doing in this type of an incrementality test is we're breaking it out into people who have seen our ads and those who have not seen our ads. And ultimately, I'm not sure if the folks on the phone have ever worked with the measurement teams in Publisher. So the likes of Meta, the likes of Pinterest, TikTok, they have wonderful teams that are solely focused on setting up these type of user level randomized tests directly within the Publisher. But you can, of course, set these tests up yourself where you're defining your own audience into those who have seen and who have not seen the ads. And ultimately, this is a good approach. But like I said, you may need to rely on the support of the publisher. So if you have an account manager or you're using it internally yourself, however, it can be a little bit more nuanced and difficult to set up. Secondly, the second approach is more of a time series analysis. The simple way to consider this approach is we're using a training period, so historical data that we have, to be able to predict the future period. And this can be an incredibly helpful way if your business is quite stable or you're looking at broad range of trends. So I personally oversaw a lot of time series analysis around the COVID period. What we were ultimately doing was trying to give boards a true understanding of the effect that COVID had on particular businesses, where we're using years and years of historical data to be able to then kind of understand the difference to that particular COVID period. As you can see on the slide here, what we're doing is we have the training period. Then, of course, we have the lower line is the indication of what we predict to happen. But in this example, we're applying some difference. So maybe we're increasing our investment within this particular kind of channel or source. And that increase is resulting in a higher number of conversions than we anticipated. And that, of course, then is considered the incremental revenue or conversion volume for that particular advertiser. Again, this is a useful source of incrementality. From running these myself back a couple of years ago, it required a lot of analysts and data scientists, and it was complicated to explain it to those perhaps in the business who are not very tech savvy when it comes to understanding of statistics and this approach to measurement. So thirdly, and this is the one we're going to focus on today, is GEO Incrementality Tests. This idea around splitting our marketing into different geographies. And again, similarly, we're showing ads to certain locations and not to others. Now, this again can be considered quite a nuanced and perhaps challenging approach to take, because it does require some consideration. Now, this can be done across countries, can be done across cities, regions, states, but we are speaking about breaking things out into specific geographies. Now, the things I suppose, the use cases here when we come to GEO incrementality tests is that we're really aiming to validate the incremental ROAS of our existing ads. So what we're looking at is when we're perhaps have a control group where we're not displaying any campaigns, and then of course have our test group where we're pushing additional revenue or advertising investment toward this. We're trying to understand what is the difference, in this particular state where we're now showing an increased level of investment, what is the incremental impact of that? Are we receiving the expected return on investment for that? Or perhaps that increase in investment is redundant and perhaps that budget is better distributed to another channel, another type of area within your marketing mix. Of course, then we have the diminishing marginal returns. Often as marketers, we're trying to understand when and where have we hit the ceiling of our particular marketing mix. So as we're investing across search, social, display, it's often difficult to understand the what if I invest more, will that result in an increased level of conversions, or perhaps I've hit that ceiling? Again, this is another point where with the incrementality approach, we can look at allocating an additional uplift of advertising investment for a specific geography, and then ultimately test and controlling that to see if that increase in ad cost had a compounding effect on the overall performance. Of course, then we're speaking to some advertisers that this has come up where they're looking to test new campaign types or perhaps new product types before they go into a full-scale launch. So it's a nice way to be able to test and learn by essentially looking at breaking out two geographies or two kind of region cohorts to be able to do some level of understanding of test and learn before you go into a full-scale investment of your particular, whether it be a product launch or whether it be an entirely new campaign type or channel. So the business requirements for geo testing, this is I suppose a simple recommendation for a starting point as to when we believe the approach of a geo experiment makes sense. So we suggest you have at least 1,000 monthly conversions across all regions, and that all regions in that instance will be included within that test. If you're on the line here today and you're considering geo experiments, please reach out to myself or a member of the team and we can speak about the specifics of your business, the specific objectives of what you're aiming to achieve. Whether that's you're asking yourself, is branded search really driving the needle? And maybe perhaps our customers will find us anyway through organic and SEO, and perhaps our investment in brand is not warranted. Maybe it's the case that it absolutely is, and your competitors are extremely aggressive. And if you weren't investing in brand, ultimately, then you'd be at a loss to your competitors. You may be asking yourself, is Meta performing? All of these questions can be answered through this lens of geo incrementality. But when we approach this idea of geo incrementality, what we're ultimately doing is taking a test in a control branch of two geographies. There's a lot of areas that we need to consider or factors we need to keep in mind when approaching this. Most importantly is that market similarity and the historical stability. So what we're ultimately doing is we're trying to create a test in a control branch that have very similar or nearly exact same kind of behavioral customer journey flows. And this is the core part for any A/B test. And in many ways, this incrementality approach is simply an A/B test. We need to keep everything the same. So what we're ultimately doing, and the kind of challenge, particularly if you're launching this maybe in-house without the support of a third party, you need to do a deep analysis of your website behavior and your customer journey reports from ultimately within the two device cohorts. Of course, you need to consider the competitive landscape, the likes of the statistical power within that analysis, and of course, the randomization. So there's many different factors that we need to keep in mind when running an experiment like this. What we've derived here at SegmentStream is using methodologies, of course, found within marketing, but also used in the broader sector of course, pharmaceuticals and healthcare. These are scientific methodologies that are used not just within marketing. And there's a lot of areas that we need to be mindful of in order for this to be statistically significant, I suppose would be the key word that we would always refer to here at SegmentStream. So what you're really looking to do is leverage a technology like SegmentStream for an unbiased and accurate test and control market decision. When I speak to advertisers today, there's always this inherent understanding of their business. And of course, we will respect that. But often our inherent human understanding that perhaps if we're speaking about two geographies, that user behavior across France and Germany is for the most part the same. The reality is it may not be when we actually look at the concrete behavioral data. When we look at the data that we have available from website behavior, from conversion data, we may see two distinct differences there, and that makes them not appropriate to be included in this particular experiment, or perhaps they should be included within the same group to kind of amplify the overall level of variety within that branch. So this is where using technology can do that at scale, can do that incredibly efficiently, but more importantly, do that accurately for you. And this is really something we've invested quite heavily in recent months. Within SegmentStream, of course, and within any level of data modeling and data science, it's often we're not working with perfect samples of data. So if you're, for example, advertising in a single country, of course, across certain cities, so your core cities is where you're going to have a lot of your website traffic, your conversion data, etc. So it really doesn't make sense, I suppose, for us to look at breaking these out to over segmented. And what we're ultimately doing is using an approach which we deem synthetic control. It's a widely used approach, particularly across the likes of healthcare and pharmaceutical. And what this is doing is essentially finding those correlations and applying some synthetic modeling to that to ensure that our test to control branch are the same. If you're not familiar with synthetic control, I encourage you maybe to do some research yourself. If you'd like to get in the weeds and have a cup of coffee and talk about, I suppose, how we are applying coefficients to the control group, I'll be more than happy to have that conversation with you. The third point here then is that, so we spoke a little bit around selecting the geographies. We're now talking about, the synthetic control approach. And of course, then it's around understanding the minimal detectable effect. In many ways, that's just a fancy word for being statistically significant. And this is something that is very, very important to understand. So what we're ultimately looking at when we're looking at the minimum detectable effect is, can we trust this data? This is something that you should understand prior to launching an incrementality test, and of course, when interpreting the results. So the minimal detectable effect is essentially giving you an understanding of, can I launch this incrementality test? Or perhaps if I launch it, what are the chances that the minimal detectable effect will be reached? This may become a little bit clearer when we go through a couple more slides and of course the platform itself. It's important to take your sales cycle into consideration. So the typical duration for this is, of course, the typical duration for a user to achieve that set goal or objective on your particular website. So what SegmentStream is going to do is automatically suggest the experiment length based on the data that we're observing. So for example, if you have a reasonably quick path to purchase, and from that consideration to conversion path is only 7 to 14 days, that may be an optimal enough period for us to run that experiment for you. If it's a case that you have a longer sales cycle, it's likely the output will be perhaps a longer period needed to understand the true incrementality of that. Again, for us as advertisers, we may have the support of analysts and data scientists in-house that can do this research and understanding for us. But again, given SegmentStream has access typically to all of that data, should you be partnered with us, it's very easy for us to automatically populate that data and automatically include that within the experiment to give you a recommendation on this is the period or the duration that your experiment should run. Lastly, and I'm sure this is a given for most of us on the call when running any experiments, is that you don't touch anything. So we set it up and then we have to allow it to run its course without any intervention. This, of course, can be difficult for us as marketers, particularly if we're revenue conscious and we do see that a particular branch is tanking and performance is no longer hitting the mark for us. It's very important that we're communicating that to the wider stakeholders within the business to say that we're running an experiment. This experiment will possibly have some negative impacts from a revenue or conversion perspective as it's untested and an unknown outcome. But ultimately, in order for this test to be worthwhile, for us to extract the insight from that, we need to allow it take its course, run its course, and of course, can't touch anything for that particular period. So what I'm going to do now is just quickly navigate over to the platform itself and just walk you through the experiment itself within the SegmentStream platform. So for those of you who are familiar and perhaps partners with us already, you'll have seen the GEO tests have now been added as a module within the platform. But ultimately what we can do is we can create an experiment, and you as a user can create an experiment. So it may be the case that you're aiming to understand, like I said, what is the true impact of Performance Max across your Google stack? What you would ultimately do is you can click create an experiment, go through a very simplified form fill that allows you to be able to select the campaigns that you wish to test and what your objective is. So if you're a pure play e-commerce, that may be a purchase. If you're in the automotive, that may be book a test drive. Whatever the case is, we're able to model that out for you. So to walk through what SegmentStream does for you. So ultimately within the settings, we've defined our goal and objective. In this case, it's a lead. We've selected all of the various different campaigns that we are looking to test. So in this example, in what I alluded to was maybe we're testing Performance Max. And what we're ultimately doing is trying to understand what is the incrementality of those particular campaign set. So we will define when we wish to start this campaign or this experiment. So we have an understanding within our business that, okay, we're willing to start it on in this case, it was the 14th of January. SegmentStream will firstly auto-calculate the experiment end date based on all of the data that we have available. Then we start to look at the split. So this particular example of split is based on city. We've then also calculated what that typical sales period is. SegmentStream then automatically calculates out the test and control branches for you. So in this case, across cities in the UK, you can see that we've automatically defined the various different cities that we believe are the most optimal for a GEO incrementality test. So in this test and control branch, you can see the various outcomes of these. If it's a case that maybe you want to have a manual input in this, perhaps Manchester for you as an advertiser this month or this quarter is strategic, it is possible to manually remove and omit it. However, that will have an effect on the minimum detectable effect. So the minimum detectable effect, of course, is the smallest measurable impact or change that we can measure that results in a statistically significant experiment. So in this instance, the minimum detectable effect is 14.9%. So in order for this to be a statistically significant experiment, we need to have an MDE or a minimum detectable effect above this value. What that means is that ultimately the incrementality or the result of this experiment must be greater than 14.9%. So in this particular experiment, you can see that the incrementality of the campaigns we tested was 35.5%. And this, of course, indicates that it was a statistically significant experiment. Within the platform, we've also visualized a dashboard to allow you to monitor the experiment as it's running, but also be able to quickly check and screen that within the test market that spends have dropped as we've expected, because of course what we're ultimately doing typically within this type of experiment is we're sunsetting, pausing and cost for those selected markets. If you have any questions specifically related to this, you can pop them in the chat box and I'll do my best to answer those for you. Or perhaps, like I said, you reach out to myself or a member of the team and we can talk you through specifically how this would work for you and your business. The key takeaways here for you perhaps on the call today is SegmentStream is doing this at scale, efficiently, automated, but more importantly, it's giving you the data an indication of what the minimum detectable effect is, and of course, calculating the true incrementality for you. So there's not only just time savers here, but it's giving you the guarantee of this is an accurate, scientifically proven experiment that is giving me the true value of whatever channel campaign type you may be testing. So we'll navigate back to here. And I've spoken about this a little bit, I suppose, is how to evaluate or interpret the results. So here, of course, we're looking at the incrementality. So the minimum detectable effect, of course, is that point, that minimum incrementality we need to observe. And then, of course, once we receive that, we're guaranteed that this is a statistically significant result. So in this instance, it's 35.5%. And that's telling us that the campaigns that we're running, they are incremental by that particular amount. So the next kind of question or reason we're diving into incrementality tests is to be able to extract and utilize the data. So as we're all aware and familiar, performance marketing measurement, particularly when we're investing across brand, search, social display, is incredibly difficult when investing cross-channel. It's incredibly difficult because we're working with complex user journeys, cross-device, cross-browser, etc. So if you're familiar with SegmentStream and our unique visit scoring technology, our core modeling approach that is using a very sophisticated model to calculate every single visit, and then of course we're incorporating impressions and video views, the output of that is incredibly helpful for advertisers to understand the truer value of what their performance marketing campaigns may be. However, although the SegmentStream core model, the output is typically far more truthful or impactful than what you're seeing within a last click or a DDA model, there are still areas where this approach doesn't fully capture. So in this slide, we're just speaking a little bit to how the influence of Facebook ads in this example, if we're looking on a last click model, was simply only 44K. However, when we're looking through the SegmentStream machine learning attribution, we're estimating that it's around 144K. However, by running an incrementality test, we're getting a much more concrete understanding of the true incrementality of Facebook ads. What this allows us to do as a data science company and as a measurement company is take this insight and apply that within the core model within SegmentStream. So it allows you to further fine-tune the output of your measurement solution. And this is really our philosophy here at SegmentStream, is that firstly, performance marketing measurement set is quite complex and challenging. And we're leaning into as many methodologies and theories as possible to be able to help the advertiser find the closest source of truth as possible. And this will be one way as to how we would work with you as an advertiser, is first utilizing SegmentStream's core approach to measurement, and then fine tuning that with the insight extracted from the likes of a GEO incrementality test. How we would do this is essentially by using the attribution adjustment. Again, if any of you on the call are familiar with SegmentStream, you may be familiar with this feature and functionality, but this allows us as a team to calibrate the output of the machine learning model. But as a part of customer success, we would educate you as well on how to tweak this yourself. So our aim, of course, is to support advertisers the best we can, but our aim is to educate advertisers as well. So we designed SegmentStream to be that self-service platform to allow you to run your own incrementality tests and then further fine-tune your model. Of course, in the early days when you're perhaps just familiarizing yourself, we do offer a white glove managed service to perhaps lay down the foundations for you in that first trial period. So this again slide kind of just explains a little bit more of what the output of a model may be without calibration and then with that further calibration. So everything we're doing here with this idea of adding incrementality testing into the mix of the core SegmentStream approach is fine-tuning the output closer to the truth. So we'll speak a little bit to the benefits, right? So firstly, there's no attribution bias. This is really giving you a clear view of the real sales influence that a particular channel or campaign may have. It's incredibly helpful for measuring TV, radio, offline, etc., where the typical kind of digital approach may not be the appropriate fit. It is, of course, a true cookieless solution. So we're not reliant on any cookies whatsoever for this type of approach. This is simply a scientifically proven approach of test and control, displaying ads to certain people and not to others, and then measuring the incrementality between that. So in many ways, it's an incredibly simple approach on the surface. However, what we've outlined, of course, in terms of selecting the right geolocations, the minimum detectable effect, that requires a lot of thought and consideration. But once that's defined, the experiment itself and its core theory is reasonably straightforward and, of course, cookieless. The final point on this speaks to how it's slightly more agile than marketing mix modeling. So there's no need to collect data for years and years. Like I said, MMM is an incredibly valuable approach if you're an advertiser spending large amount across investment. You have a large amount of session data, offline data to utilize, and also years of data. But by running an incrementality test, perhaps within a 2 to 4 week period, you could have a true understanding of what the true value of those particular campaigns or channels may be. There are, of course, some negative impacts of running a GEO incrementality test. So it's not suitable for continuous reporting and day-to-day analysis. So it's not an approach that you would have always on. I know as marketers, we're always encouraged to be continuously testing, A/B testing creatives, messaging, etc. We wouldn't take that approach with a GEO incrementality test. It is quite an invasive test. And you'll see that in the fourth bullet point there, that it could result in the temporary loss of sales in regions. And that is probably the largest negative part that I hear from senior marketers is I quite can't afford to disable my performance marketing campaigns or this particular channel in these core regions because I do have sales targets to hit. And if I do so, I fear that ultimately we won't hit that target. That is a very fair feeling to have. And I understand that, driving value within the business is, of course, our core role and objective. But it is about educating senior stakeholders on the value of what we receive for perhaps a 4-week period where we're sunsetting those particular campaigns. The insight we will extract from that will further give us insight to the preceding 6 months or 12 months. So the idea is that the data we're extracting from this incrementality test allows us to enter into our measurement navigation for the preceding 6-12 months with confidence, which is something that us as marketers haven't really had, particularly when trying to measure cross-channel. The lack of granularity is something as well. So typically this is only suitable for a channel or a campaign type level. So if you're looking to A/B test quite granular levels of ad types or whatever the case may be, this is not the right approach for you. The last point, or the third point on the slide, and the last one I'll touch on, is this speaking to kind of data science and expertise to conduct a test experiment properly. So this, I think, is perhaps the unknown or unspoken about challenge around incrementality tests. A lot of folks, consider geo experiments as something that is easy to action and easy to approach. And I would agree, it is very easy to approach and easy to action. However, the core parts of minimum detectable effect and the likes of finding those test and control geographies with a statistically significant output is incredibly important. And that does require experienced data scientists and analysts that understand how to approach this with your data. What we spoke a little bit around the temporary loss of sales, but what I would say is launching an incrementality test without the correct guidance and expertise could be detrimental. You maybe have a loss in revenue or loss in sales because you've naturally sunset or paused advertising investment within a certain geolocation. But more importantly, if that is a statistically insignificant test, then ultimately that was a complete waste for you and your business. So we speak a little bit here around how it is essential to test often. So typically we would recommend that you would run an incrementality test at least perhaps once a quarter. And the reason for this is that firstly, your business best, but we see that elements can change. So the landscape you're in today will likely be different in 3 to 6 months' time. That may be linked to competitors, maybe linked to the overall auction and people competing for you, or perhaps just changes in your own business, maybe your own pricing or product ranges, etc. So we are in a very fluid ecosystem, and I think it's important to adopt this strategy of not just once and done, but to try and explain it internally that this is an approach that we're going to adopt at the very minimum once or twice a year. However, if you have the ability to run this once a quarter, it really allows you as a marketer to enter into your budget allocation decisions with absolute confidence. When you present back to financial leadership, you have a true understanding that your 250K of budget invested into Facebook was the absolute correct amount of investment, and you have a very good understanding of the incremental impact or the core revenue that you've derived from that particular investment. So the question you may have, and it might be coming a little bit clearer around in-house versus a specialized partner. If you have an in-house team, then that's wonderful. If you have an analyst and data scientist that are familiar with this, that it really is something that I would encourage you to adopt. And this, I suppose, it makes sense for the larger advertisers. So we're partnered with some of the largest advertisers, both in EMEA and North America, and they have quite large teams that would be running these types of tests upwards, they'd be well over the once a quarter mark. But if you're perhaps a medium-sized business that's, has no real experience to geo tests, the idea around calculating a minimal detectable effect and having that understanding of statistically significance is something that may be daunting for you. It really makes sense to kind of get some support there. Of course, there are some agencies that specialize in running this, but of course, why use there is a solution here that's built, like hopefully you've seen a glimpse of it within the platform and how easy it is to create that experiment. And essentially we're using data science and machine learning to take a lot of the heavy lifting out of that. We're auto-populating what those suggested markets are, what the MDE is, and ultimately that final incrementality. If you're an agency on today's call, this can be also an incredibly value add to you in your just day-to-day of QBRs and servicing your clients. So of course we understand that typically those mid and upper funnel channels are often undervalued and under-indexed from an advertiser's marketing mix. And this approach really gives you the data point to sit in your QBR or your annual review with your clients and say, Mr. Customer, I know I've said that we probably should be spending 10 or 15% more in TikTok. Well, now I have a data source that pinpoints to this with absolute scientific accuracy. And we see this resonating quite a lot with our agency partners. So this just speaks a little bit to kind of the return on investment that one can expect. So if you were to partner with a specialized vendor, you would expect to pay perhaps a one-time fee of maybe 10K for this particular type of experiment. But there's large amounts of savings with that. So the extraction of insights that you're going to receive from running a properly set up and scientifically proven, statistically significant experiment will pay dividends. And I think that's the core point of today's conversation, is that when done effectively, the insight that can be gained can dictate not just investment within that channel, but also give you an indication as to its mix within your whole marketing suite. So across full funnel of search, social, display. There are, of course, temporary loss in sales and tests and regions, and that does need to be considered. That is certainly a short-term kind of con, like we said, that ultimately there are regions that are not going to be exposed to ads, but in the same time, there is massive sales growth opportunity if we prove incrementality. So if we are proving incrementality within that region and we understand that we haven't reached that diminishing marginal return, that there is opportunity to increase investment not only by 5%, but actually by 15, 20%, that ultimately is giving us the green light to scale our business, drive revenue and ROI with a metric that we can trust. So I think it is the balance of short-term investment to long-term gains. And it is about educating ourselves, but also whether we're a direct client and it's educating our perhaps financial leadership, or within an agency, educating clients and of course those financial stakeholders that there may be a little pain to begin with, but the overall long-term gains can be very tangibly seen. So yeah, with that, I will pause for any questions. We have about kind of 10 minutes or so left. So I'm more than happy to field any questions as they come through. Yeah. Cool. So I have one question just coming through here. Do you use your own algorithms or external open source libraries for GEO Lift from Meta? This is a really good question. So we've done a lot of research and development specifically tied to this type of testing. And we reviewed and tested a whole list and multiple open source libraries. Each library has its own pros and cons, but I suppose as a result, we essentially developed our proprietary solution that incorporates components available from the various different open source libraries. So what I would say is that we don't rely on one single library or source, but we've taken all the available sources and methodologies to be able to build our own proprietary approach to GeoLift. But a good question. I see a second question here. Can we test the incremental ROI of brand campaigns on Google using this method? Yes. So this is actually a question I hear quite a lot. And the short answer is yes, you can. So some customers have concerns, of course, that by disabling brand campaigns, they may lose revenue because we're ultimately going to have cannibalization from competitors. However, in reality, and I think I spoke to this earlier, that it may not actually be the case. Perhaps your customer base, your loyal customer base, will come find you anyway, and the incrementality of your brand isn't actually as great as you once thought it was. And that's something we're seeing quite a lot, particularly when we're looking at those advertisers who are still very much on a multi-touch, data-driven, last-click approach. Branded search is always inflated. And that's simply because even perhaps those who don't know our brand simply retargeted and then are coming back through paid search, the conversion is ultimately attributed back to paid search. So what we've to that branded search in that instance. So nevertheless, an incrementality test is certainly a good option here, because what we're looking at is trying to understand everything today is in related to the incrementality, but ultimately there may be an opportunity to reduce investment in those branded campaigns for overall revenue and ROI. Okay, so we have a question here that's linked to, I think, one of our competitors. So it's how do you different from measured, from what measured provides? So from my own research, as well as some feedback from customers, what I would say is that measured focuses very much on the data scientists and the analyst. And I would never like to speak ill of any of our competitive landscape. But I suppose what I hear in the market is that it can be quite complicated for the day-to-day marketer. So that's, individual in a performance marketing team, or, the media buyers within an agency, to set it up, to utilize, but more importantly, to be able to communicate the results. So our aim here at SegmentStream is to always simplify the technicals, because what we found ourselves is performance marketing is incredibly technical. And we've designed it for non-technical people, or essentially marketing leaders who don't have the time to set up and manage incrementality tests themselves. So SegmentStream provides a comprehensive measurement solution that's not only also looking at incrementality. So for those of you who are familiar with SegmentStream, perhaps those who are not, the core visit scoring technology is the core aspect on the value proposition that we bring. Incrementality is this additional methodology to be able to further fine-tune your marketing measurement. But a good question, if you're interested maybe in having a one-to-one conversation around how we differ to that solution, or also any others, I'm more than happy to field those questions myself. And I see one more question here in relation to how long does it take to set up and run the GEO test in SegmentStream? So if you're a new or potential customer and you're not yet a partner of SegmentStream, what I encourage you to do is to reach out and we can have a conversation. Because what we would need to do is to integrate with your behavioral data, your conversion data, and we would simultaneously set up the visit scoring technology as that core methodology. On top of that, then, of course, we would run the GEO and the incrementality test, but we would first need to build your machine learning model. So really, you'd be looking at probably a 3-month period for the guided setup, the evaluation, and to ensure that the model itself is predicting with accuracy. The test itself, depending on your sales cycle, etc., may only take between kind of 7, 14, 21 days, depending on that. But if you're on the call and you're considering this is a valuable approach you'd like to include into your testing, do reach out again to myself or a member of the team, and we can talk about what onboarding SegmentStream for maybe a one-off experiment would look like. Of course, our hope would be that you would become a long-term customer. If you're an existing SegmentStream customer, well then let's have a member of your customer success team work with you on that. Most likely we could run that within a month. We already have your existing data. It would just come down to your sales cycle and ultimately what the model estimates or kind of recommends for that test duration to be. So cool. I think that's all the questions. Oh, sorry, I see one more. Can it ascertain channel level incrementality? Scenario: connected TV ad campaign is planned to run on selected geos, but there are other channel campaigns that will be running across geos along with CTV that is only targeted in the incrementality impact CVD. Okay, so this particular question is speaking to essentially where we have we're running TV campaigns, but there's also going to be additional kind of channel advertising within that same region. So it is essentially what I'm gathering from this question is that we're testing one single channel, but there is perhaps noise within that ecosystem at the same time. So that would be, I suppose, a conversation to always have internally as well, and also with SegmentStream as a kind of a consultant and customer success organization, to be able to understand what other elements are happening within that could have an effect on the incrementality or the output of the campaign. However, in most cases, there shouldn't be any noise, right? Because we're simply sunsetting all of the various. So if you're testing connected TV, and that connected TV is, you're showing it in certain geography and you're not showing it in another. Ultimately, there will be incrementality within that. You just need to ensure that all other things remain the exact same. So we need to make sure that we're like any A/B tests, your test and control remain the exact same, bar what we're testing. So when I say noise, this is what we need to ensure that both branches are as noisy or not as noisy as each other. But again, a good question that we can speak specifically to this. If you wish again to reach out, you can drop me a note via email and we can speak specifically to that. Cool. So I don't see any more questions coming through the chat. Um, I'd like to thank you all for taking the time to join today's session. If this was your very first time engaging with SegmentStream, it was a real pleasure to speak with you. If you have spoken to us in the past and you're interested maybe in hearing more, there's been a lot of development within our own product, in our core approach, and also within our budget allocation, budget optimizing feature set and functionality as well. So perhaps it may be a good time for us to have a conversation as well. So if you're interested in grabbing a cup of coffee and speaking all things measurement, attribution, and how this relates to budget allocation, I'd be really keen to connect. I see one last comment. Love the hair you had before. Great session. Believe it or not, I still have the long hair. I just have it up in a bun today, but I appreciate the comment. Thank you, folks. It's a real pleasure, and I'll let you go back to your day. Thank you very much. Take care.